Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us in our session about accessibility. As we all know, at this year's Frankfurt Book Fair, Canada is the guest of honor, and the slogan for Canada being the guest of honor is singular plurality, which stands for Canadian society for many reasons. And singular plurality also includes a diverse society, different people with different preconditions. And that's why accessibility is indirectly closely linked with singular plurality. And that's why we are very happy to have Diana Varma as a guest from Toronto, Canada. She's going to introduce herself in a minute. And Lena Faray, second-year student from Mediapublishing at Stuttgart Media University, who initiated this session. So this session is Lena's idea. And Lena, welcome. And thank you for having us, as it was your idea. We're going to have a conversation about accessibility, comparing Germany and Canada, all that related to the media and particularly to the book industry. But before that, our audience should know who is actually talking. So I would ask our guest from Toronto, Diana, could you please introduce yourself and what's your relation to accessibility?
Sure thing. Thank you for having me. This is fun. Woohoo! I feel like I wish I was there in Germany, but this is a close second. So my name is Diana Varma, and I am a graphic communications management educator at Ryerson University in Toronto. And I'm also a columnist by day and kind of an avid podcaster in the world of graphic communications by night. So more generally, I like to think of myself as a curious human, as it were. So I teach in the areas of book production, of typography, of interdisciplinary innovation, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But my real area of expertise is, or my very kind of, my slice of this world that I know best is book production, which is closely tied to publishing, of course. So I spent the majority of my time in industry when I worked in industry working for a book printer, working with clients all over North America to bring their published works to life. So that's a little bit about my background, but how the way in which I'm kind of involved with accessibility. So in 2018, I was granted the opportunity to be part of developing our school's first accessibility for graphic communications course. So this was a groundbreaking course, and I was so excited to be on kind of in that initial team that was developing it. So I jumped into the project with lots of vigor, and I tried to learn all that I could about the space. And I tapped into resources around my university and also and beyond my university, and met some really incredible people and learned a lot in the process. So accessibility and inclusion, they really hold kind of a special place for me, and they're very, very important for a number of reasons. So I felt like developing this course was my opportunity to spread the word and kind of share with others how they could fit in this accessibility piece and inclusion piece into the communication puzzle, which is sometimes an overlooked piece of the puzzle, is making this, whatever you are creating, whatever you are publishing, accessible to the greatest number of people. So I haven't, since 2018, when I first developed that course, I haven't touched it since. So in 2021, I really felt it was time to brush up my understanding of where we are with accessibility today. So I'm in the middle of it right now. I'm in the thick of it, releasing a podcast series. It's a 6-part series all about accessibility in our world of graphic communications. So that series, I have had the great honor and privilege of sitting down with 6 individuals, some of whom are persons with disabilities, and others are allies and advocates of persons with disabilities. And they're really, the connection between all of them is to the fact that they're making the world a more inclusive place through their creative leadership. And so some of what this conversation will be about today, and some of my responses, I'm sure, will come from their lived experiences. So I'm excited to share that with everyone today.
Wow, thanks so much. That sounds really amazing. Lena, what's your approach to accessibility? You're in your second year of studies. How come that you discovered accessibility as an interesting topic?
Yeah, first I'm going to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Lena. I'm currently studying media publishing at the University of Media in Stuttgart, Germany. I was part of this year's planning team for our stand studying all about books, and my part was planning today's topic, which includes accessibility and diversity in Canada. And in this year's planning team, for each day of the book fair, we discussed how this topic is barely talked about in public and that it just doesn't get the attention it deserves and it needs. So we thought about how important it is for us that there will be more implementations in today's media world concerning accessibility, and that even those people who don't have anything to do with barrier-free methods should know about existing and missing measures.
Okay, thanks so much. Now, to kind of get closer to the core of it, let me start with the United Nations Convention, which includes Article 9, which requires or demands accessibility in all the societies of the countries that have signed the United Nations Convention. Is it a rather formal requirement? Are we obliged to implement accessibility, or is it more? Diana, why do you think is accessibility crucial for our societies?
Good question. So for me, I think accessible design is simply good design. So by actively making something more accessible and thinking about it from the initial stages of conception and the design stages, that document or that published work will be better for everybody. It's a better designed, better thought out document for everybody. So it could be as simple as adding additional white space and kind of giving a document room to breathe. Or it could be something, if we're speaking of digital publishing, for example, providing a very clear hierarchy and clear tagging on a website's landing page. I mean, that helps everybody. So yes, it assists those who, for example, use a screen reader full time and who rely on that strong hierarchical background to a website or a document to navigate it, but it also makes it that much more inherently usable for everybody. So accessible design is really good design. But more than that, I think that accessibility is just important to be a good kind of citizen, community citizen or global citizen. So giving someone that opportunity, so playing a small role in providing someone an opportunity to live a more independent life, to live a barrier-free life, and be independent, I think is a very makes it a very important. It's a very important part that we play in the publishing world and in the printing world to enable people to live as independently as they possibly can. So I think now maybe is a good time so there's two models of disability that I wanted to kind of share that I think will help set the stage for our work in accessibility in the world of publishing and communications. So there is a medical model of disability, and this is more of an old school model. So it's based on the notion that the person is broken or the person is not normal. Right? So this comes with medical interventions. It comes with kind of these afterthoughts, these bolt-on solutions for accessibility that make the document or the project that much more usable. But that's again kind of an old school method and an old school mentality. And the newer school mentality, and I think the better one, the more inclusive one, is the social model of disability. So this says that the person is not disabled, but it's the environment that is disabling. So it's normal for people to have different abilities and different levels of ability or ableness in society. But the environments that we are using, whether those are physical environments or digital environments, that we need to think about designing them in a way that as many people as possible can use them in a barrier-free way. So that's, I think, a kind of important piece here. And then one other thing I will say that's related to this is that we have to remember that the term disability doesn't simply refer to someone with vision loss or someone with hearing loss or someone with a lack of mobility in a certain way or another, but it can refer to also invisible disabilities and neurodiversity, and it could be a permanent disability or a temporary disability. So I'm thinking, for me, I have 2 kids, and my kids are now, well, almost 5 and 2.5. But when I was pregnant with them, I had certain limitations and certain things that I just couldn't do that made me kind of have that temporary disability in that time in my life. So one statistic shows that even just 1 in every 2 people, so 50% of the population, will at some point in their lives be disabled. Whether, again, that's kind of permanent or temporary, whether that's visible or invisible. So the moral of the story is that designing for accessibility and designing for inclusion is simply the right thing to do.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Diana. That is very precious input. And I really like the expression limitation. Maybe that's in the future, the notion we will summarize all this under, because it includes a lot more than disability with a strongly physical implication. I like limitation very much. And considering that we are not the same person every day, we can have a bad night and we might have limitations the day after, in contrary to the day before. So I think that's a very helpful concept.
I was going to say that's me today.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that's me today. I didn't get much sleep last night. My little one was tossing and turning all night, and I feel a little, I'm feeling that today. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Okay. No, but what a nice example how normal or typical that is. Let's maybe move on to the current situation and the 2 countries, Germany and Canada. And Lena, I'd like to ask you, representing Germany in this little talk, how do you perceive accessibility in Germany, with an emphasis on the media industry and publishing? What do you think is the current situation? How can we describe what we've achieved in Germany and what's still missing?
So there's a disability equality law in Germany, which points out that every handicapped person must be treated the same way as people who don't have any disabilities. So I think Germany is trying to do their best to have barrier-free methods for these people. For example, it is mandatory to provide audio description for the blind and partially sighted, but it's not mandatory to actually broadcast these movies or programs. There are only audio movies available in some cinemas and also programs and shows on public TV, but not so many. And there's also German literature in the form of printed books for these disabilities, but they only cover about 5%, which is available on the German market. But for those who'd rather listen to audiobooks, there are some libraries which are so-called tape libraries. A lot of audiobooks are being shortened, but these libraries borrow you those audiobooks in full length and completely free for disabled people. And on top of that, on top of that, all costs for adjustments are being covered for mobile devices like smartphones. For example, additional voiceovers, voice control, screen readers, and many other options. And by now, there are as well settings on some German websites for those who, for example, have dyslexia. They're struggling with understanding complex text. And with this setting, the website is shown in a very easy language to understand for everyone. Furthermore, there are many German organizations which are working on media devices with disabled people, and they would know the best which functions and options they need to cover all their needs. So when they finish a project, they can use these apps, websites, etc. for themselves afterwards. And these organizations are supporting them with everything in the media sector, whether it's writing their own blog, producing movies, or recording songs. And regarding learning methods, there is an opportunity for e-learning in many schools and universities universities, deaf and hearing impaired people have access to all the educational content and have the possibility to get in touch with fellow students and lecturers. And even though that sounds as many things that Germany does for disabled people, it's definitely still missing a lot. Germany needs to focus on engaging cinemas and TV channels to actually broadcast barrier-free movies and programs, not only for blind or partially sighted people, but also for the deaf. And the same applies to books and audiobooks. They need to encourage publishing companies to publish more affordable books with Braille and to improve the length and the pricing of their audiobooks. There is also a problem with the opportunity to learn from home and learning in person. Every school and university should offer both at the same time. So those who can attend their classes in person should be allowed to do that. And those who can, for example, be paralyzed can follow their classes online without feeling excluded. And because of the corona pandemic, every educational institution should be prepared now to offer both. And yeah, I mean, e-learning worked great in the last few months, so why not continue and keep that method for everyone?
Good point. Thanks so much, Lena, for your very rich and detailed answer. And that sounds quite a lot, but you pointed out at the same time that there is still room for improvement. Now I'm very curious, Diana, Canada, from a German point of view, Canada is like the role model when it comes to inclusion, yeah? Just like hockey, you're far better than Germany. And I think that's true for accessibility and inclusion as well. Now, considering the aspects Lena just mentioned, how would you describe the situation in Canada or Ontario in particular?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the technology and a lot of the things, Lena, that you mentioned in the media sector are quite similar. So perhaps I can speak to some of the kind of the legislation or the regulation happening. So accessibility and inclusion is becoming something that is required to comply with for provincial law. So in Canada, the accessibility is governed provincially. So in Ontario, which is where Toronto is, that's where I am focused and we're focused. So here in Ontario, it's called the AOTA. So it's groundbreaking regulation and legislation. So AOTA stands for Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So basically it aims to remove barriers and kind of enable a more accessible Ontario with a deadline of January 1st, 2025, which is a very short time away. So this law came into act in 2005. So it gave businesses 20 years to follow all of the regulations and guidelines, and contained within the AOTA are 5 standards. So businesses must provide accessibility in the following categories. So there's customer service, there's information and communications, which is much of what we're talking about today falls under, employment, transportation, and design of public spaces. So while the technologies that Lena mentioned and a lot of the e-learning initiatives that we're still trying to kind of navigate and figure out and what the future looks like in terms of e-learning or hybrid models of learning or offering things in person and online, what I can say is that we're very kind of on top of things. I think we're in a good position, but there's still a lot of challenges and a lot of hurdles for individual businesses to overcome and figure out before that deadline.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's nice to hear that you too see room for improvement. It makes us feel more comfortable, probably. but still, it's interesting to kind of benefit from the achievements Canada and Ontario have made so far, because there is something you can really be inspired as a German citizen. I experienced that during my stays in Toronto. I was really impressed by the level of inclusion you've achieved so far. Let's get back to studies at university, because that is our common ground in a way. And Lena already pointed out some aspects that have been like implemented so far. Now, Lena, what do you think? You finished your last statement with kind of an outlook what should be kept even if COVID times get better, what would you suggest? In which way should accessibility in terms of learning at university, how could it be improved? What else could we do to make our universities, and particularly the courses, the tuition at university, how can we make that more accessible?
We are constantly using a lot of e-learning methods, for example, websites for getting in touch with each other, or uploading scripts and presentations, or sharing notes and important files with each other. And there are also e-libraries on some schools and universities that everyone has a benefit from, whether it's someone with disabilities or no disabilities. So I would say that every educational institutions should just stick on that and try to make e-learning to be used constantly besides classes in person, because everyone has benefits from it. Not only the students, but also the lecturers and the teachers at the schools and universities. And yeah.
Okay, I can hear some homework for me as well if I listen carefully. Thanks so much, Lena. That is very ambitious, but I do understand that that will be a very promising way to go. Now let's again switch over to Ryerson University in Toronto. Diana, I remember students who were so enthusiastic about your first course on accessibility. That was an elective course in, was it 2018, I think, when I spent my research semester at Ryerson, and people in my elective course were so enthusiastic about your course. That suggests there's not much room for improvement. How would you see that? How are you doing in terms of accessible tuition, accessible teaching and courses at Ryerson, at GCM, Graphic Communications Management particularly? Are you there already, or what's left in terms of improvements?
I actually spoke with one of our school's librarians who really, her job is focused in the world of providing kind of accessible documents to students who need them. So one thing I learned while I was chatting with her is that many digital copies of books are actually quite inaccessible, which I thought was interesting. So I don't know what the answer is here, but let me explain this. So for example, in my courses, as soon as virtual learning happened and classes went online because of the pandemic, I wanted to find textbooks and resources that were freely available to all students through our library. So they were free, they were available 24/7. As many students who needed them could access the same book at the same time. So I thought this was a perfect solution. But now what I learned in that conversation is because of digital rights management and the fact that many of these digital textbooks are required to be read in a proprietary web browser. So you have to stay in the browser to read the document, or you can download it, but it's kind of a locked file, which makes sense, right? The publishers don't want to give full access to the completely printable PDF that could be shared with the world. So it makes sense, but I didn't kind of put two and two together that this was potentially a problem for some of my students. So while none of my students have actually come forward and said, I can't use this, it's inaccessible, it doesn't work with my screen reader, or it doesn't work with my other assistive technology, that could potentially be the case, that I am limiting some students. Yes, I am making the textbook available and accessible to the majority of students, but there will always be instances, I think, where we can do better. We can make sure that students are able to access and able to really get the material in a way that works for them.
So, Lena, here's my question to you as a student of Stuttgart Media University. Did you ever encounter resources or situations where you had the impression this medium or this resource is not fully accessible, so not accessible to everybody, aspects in our courses at HDM that could be made more accessible?
Right now I'm thinking about the e-libraries we have. Like we can download some ebooks and normal books for free, or sometimes we have to pay for them. And not every book of them, not everything is available on every device. Sometimes you have to open it on just a laptop, and sometimes it's only available on a tablet or an iPad or a phone. And I think for some people, it could be a problem because not every person with a disability is able to use a phone or use a laptop. And I think that's something the university could work on in the future.
Okay, good point, good point. And let's maybe focus books in particular, because our program is a book publishing program, and graphic communications management at Ryerson has a publishing concentration as well. What do you see when it comes to the medium book? What could be improved to improve the accessibility there?
As I mentioned before, only about 5% of German literature is available in Braille. And although it only covers 5% of the whole German book market, it's more expensive than books that don't include Braille, and they're very unhandy. For example, the whole Harry Potter series wouldn't fit in one bookshelf. And because of that, nearly every German book comes with an audiobook, which is unfortunately most of the time shorter than the actual book. So for those who are more into reading, that's not an alternative. So I would say that they should think about doing more books in Braille and trying to make them more handy for those disabilities. And that's also a problem for paralyzed people, as they can't turn the pages. They need to read on a digital device. And there's a specific format for ebooks that are supporting tools like screen readers or voice control. And not every publishing company is using this format for their ebooks. So I think they should also try to use this format more for supporting these, for example, paralyzed people.
Okay, thank you. I think, Diana, that's for you and your former colleagues, that's great news, because it makes book production a lot more important, more crucial, probably. From a Canadian point of view, what would you like to add to the points Lena made?
Yeah, sure. So the audiobook technology from an artificial reader, for example, is something that's often used. So I know that, again, our library, if we're thinking about creating these accessible documents that are available to students, that's now the technology that they use. So it helps translate text into spoken word, whereas previous to that technology, it was someone who was who was reading the book and recording it for a student who needed access to that. So if an audio version wasn't available from the publisher, then the library would hire a student to read and almost like create the audiobook. But now we have kind of this technology that from an artificial reader that's pretty good. I mean, Braille is also still an option, but it's sometimes difficult to source. And Lena pointed out some of the other constraints, like just that it takes up so much more room. It's that much more expensive. So I think there's some interesting things being done, but time will tell as to how all of this changes, how the landscape changes, specifically in regards to book publishing, to be that much more accessible.
All right. And there's one thing I found really intriguing when you were explaining the procedure with the text-to-speech converter using OCR technology. It made me think, shouldn't we kind of grab the data in an XML format and convert it to speech from there? Isn't OCR technology like a workaround we can avoid nowadays?
Sure. Yeah. I certainly don't have the technical skill set to make that happen. but yeah, no, I mean, any way that we can build accessibility into the initial stages of a project or a published work or any sort of thing that we are creating any sort of communication creating, if we can think about it from the early stages and how we can just make accessibility a best practice versus trying to figure it all out and kind of reverse engineer at the end, yes, of course.
Okay. Which is kind of, to me, a segue into another aspect I'd like to talk with you about, and that's moving from accessibility to inclusion. Yeah, we've talked about accessible media as an area of media consumption of a certain group in society. Yeah, maybe let's move to a point of view from where we see like a large group of people, so total society using media, not so much differentiating between like impaired or handicapped or disabled people and normal people as opposed to them, but rather a heterogeneous society. So how can we, in a way, make especially accessible media more interesting or beneficial to the average user? So how can we overcome the split, the differentiation between especially accessible media for disabled people and regular media, especially accessible media, be beneficial or more interesting to the average user? Diana, any ideas on that? You're very deep into the subject area. What do you think? Is that possible?
I think it is, certainly. Well, one example that comes to mind is specifically ebooks and apps like the Kindle Reader, or we have here in Canada, I don't know if you have it, Kobo, and a few other apps like that, or e-reading technology. So for me, I mean, even though I don't have a disability, I use those apps, and for example, I will change the contrast so my eyes are that much less kind of affected by the jarring nature of the screen, and I will change the size of the text because it's available. It's an option to me. So by providing these features that are available to everybody on our devices, I think that we will all soon start to, or we just tailor that experience to our needs in that moment. And like you said, today I'm perhaps not feeling my hottest. I'm a little tired from last night. So maybe I'm reading something in my app and I make the text larger because my eyes are a little bit tired. So each and every time that we use an app or a technology, and we have those options right there in front of us that are technically speaking the accessibility options, chances are we can now use them. Anyone can use them to make that experience custom, tailor-made for them. So perhaps within those types of technologies, that's where the bridge or the gap will be bridged from kind of those with disabilities who require these assistive technologies to those who don't.
So we've discussed a couple of aspects about accessibility now, Diana, and let's look into the future. So what's still missing? You were pointing out that there's always room for improvement. So for the foreseeable future, what would you say is missing in terms of accessibility in Canada?
Right. So I think the big thing that is missing or that could be improved upon from a legislation point of view or from the government's point of view is kind of free, accessible, standardized training to create accessible communication pieces, whether that be documents or websites, because there are lots of kind of rules and regulations to follow, but I think there's really little formalized government-led training for how it needs to be done. So making sure or kind of using some of the budget that may be set aside in the world of accessibility in the provincial government, making sure that there is training for those who do want to pave the way and make their documents accessible. Because a document, I mean, we could have all of the assistive technology in the world, but if the documents are not built in an accessible way, then it's only as strong as its weakest link, which is the document itself. So I think that is missing. What is not missing, and what one of my guests on the podcast mentioned, which I thought was a great tip. So his name was Kevin Shaw, And Kevin is visually impaired, and he relies exclusively on a screen reader to use his digital devices. And what he said, what's not missing and what people need to use more because it's there for the taking is that companies sometimes try and kind of reinvent the wheel and create accessible components, for example, for the web or for apps. So it could be buttons or it could be other kind of component pieces that are part of a website. And so a lot of companies try to reinvent the wheel when there are freely available and accessible components out there that have been tested, that have been verified. So while some things will certainly work and we can build accessible components and buttons and the like, there's lots out there for the taking that companies should really kind of just jump on and use because they have been tested. So I think that the last thing I want to mention here is that we can all kind of walk a mile in someone else's shoes, as the saying goes. So there's a lot of features within our own devices. So my smartphone, for example, there's lots of features in there that can help us kind of experience or see the world through someone else's eyes. So quite literally using, for example, the color filters. So a few days ago, I turned off my color filters. I turned it on and I filtered it so it was only grayscale. It was just black and white. And what that allowed me to see is that some apps and some interfaces on my phone look really great, and the color contrast makes it so that it's easily readable. But for others, it's really really challenging to look at with that low contrast. So I think that just perhaps I'm straying from the question a little bit, but all is to say that I think there's opportunities for us if we want to learn more about accessibility ourselves in the world of publishing, in the world of printing, in the world of graphic communications. If we want to learn more, there's so many features that are built into our devices that we can practice using, and it helps us walk a mile in someone else's shoes and then design experiences and design publications that better meet the needs of as many individuals as possible.
That's really a great idea. And thinking about what you've just said, I feel our universities could be like pioneers paving the way to such a media landscape, because we have the expertise, we have the awareness at both our institutes, GCM, Graphic Communications Management, and Ryerson, and the Stuttgart Media University. What a nice societal task to take accessibility further ahead, as you just explained it. Well, thanks so much, Diana. We have had a very rich session with a lot of input, many interesting ideas. For me, like the striking concepts were that the differentiation between social and medical model of accessibility. I found that really inspiring. I found Lena's statement about the positive effect of the COVID crisis, which is a sad story in itself, but which led to more digitization and to a broader usage of digital media that could be inspiring for the further development of accessibility. And I really liked your idea of a free training for media production companies, which would foster accessible media for a broader audience. So a lot of aspects to follow. And it obviously shows that we are still on the way. And let's hope we continue this journey, and it would be great to talk about it again in 2 years' time. So as a final statement, imagine the world from an accessibility point of view in 2023. What do you think we will have achieved by then if we continue this talk in 2 years' time? What's your feeling?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that in Ontario in particular, it will be certainly top of mind for more businesses, including publishers, because again, that legislation, that deadline is looming that much closer. So for us, it's January 1st, 2025. And yeah, I mean, technology is increasing and at such an exponential rate that who knows? I mean, the future of accessibility and the future of inclusion, what role AI has to play in that, and whether that's 2 years from now or 10 years from now or 50 years from now, I mean, that's got to play a role in some way, shape, or form in helping to make our worlds more barrier free. I don't know what that will be yet. So maybe in 2 years' time we'll be talking about all of that, or maybe it's a few years out. But I think there's certainly lots happening here.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll keep that in mind. So for wrapping up, you mentioned your podcast a couple of times. Would you maybe point out or explain our audience how that podcast is available to them? So where can we find your podcast?
Certainly. So shameless plug. Here we go. So my podcast is called Talk Paper Scissors. And Talk Paper Scissors is an exploration of everything creativity in graphic communications. So if I get an idea or I have an opportunity to work with students on some interesting projects, I can use this platform to help elevate those ideas and those messages and kind of explore some neat things that are I'm curious about. So accessibility being one of them. So you can find me and my voice over at talkpaperscissors.info. So that's the website, talkpaperscissors, all one word, .info. And on Instagram, it's at talkpaperscissors. And then you can also find me, of course, at the university, doing my thing in graphic communications management and also the Master of Digital Media program.
That sounds amazing. I wish I were a student at Ryerson. Maybe someday we can have you as a guest lecturer in Stuttgart, Germany, because that sounds so intriguing, and I'm sure our students would love it like the Ryerson students do. Diana, thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks for your very rich input, and looking forward to our next talk. In the meantime, all the best, stay safe, and speak soon, Diana. Thanks so much.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.